In this video I'm going to talk about how to choose appropriate repertoire for organ voluntaries in different scenarios. I'm going to talk first of all about the pre-service voluntary, the music before the service begins. Imagine walking into the church. What do you hear? You would like to hear sounds that provide a solemn backdrop, that create a reflective atmosphere. Therefore, the music you pick should try to evoke this and to create that atmosphere. You don't want anything too loud or too lively, because there is always a risk that you might be in competition with pre-service conversations. And you may find that the louder you play, the louder the conversations become. But the pre-service music does not necessarily have to be completely reflective, and it could have ebbs and flows of tempo and dynamic. Therefore, there are lots of possibilities of repertoire that could be appropriate as pre-service voluntaries. I have here an example, a piece by the 19th century German composer Gustav Merkel, and I've taken it from Book 1 of the Progressive Organist series compiled by C.H. Trevor. These books are useful because the editor has provided suggested registrations. But we might consider in different contexts, different registrations might be necessary. For example, if you're playing an organ that has very limited selection of stops, you might not be able to use the registration suggested by the editor, or you might find that the registration suggested by the editor on your particular organ seems too loud. So you can take some liberty in interpreting these registrations. They're given really as guidance. This piece suggests the great open diapason 8, with the pedal 16 and 8-foot stops, and the great pedal coupler. And it sounds a little like this. On this organ, the open diapason on the great is a very round and very mellow sound, but you might find on your organ that it's quite a loud and raucous sound, and therefore you might need to change the suggested registration. You could use the open diapason on the swell, swapping the great to pedal coupler for the swell to pedal coupler. You might also find that on your organ you don't have an 8-foot pedal stop, and you'll just have to make do with the 16, but with the coupler on, you won't miss it too much. That piece is quite solemn, quite slow moving, but there's colour and interest in the harmony. You might like something slightly less subdued as a pre-service voluntary, something perhaps with a contrapuntal texture, and you'll find lots of examples of pieces like this in these collections and in other similar collections. The length of time that you have to play before the service might influence your choice of repertoire. If you're only going to play for 3 or 4 minutes before the service begins, then one short piece will probably be enough. Perhaps you might find that you have to repeat a passage in the piece if the service isn't ready to begin at that point. But if you have 10 or maybe 15 minutes, or in some cases you might have an even longer period to play before the service, you might need to make a selection of several pieces, or perhaps of a couple of longer pieces. Some useful repertoire for this context might be the collections of English organ music anthologies published by Novello and edited by Langley. There are a number of volumes in this series, and they cover various periods of musical history. This piece, a voluntary by John James, a composer who died in 1745, is in two sections. It has an opening slow section, which is mostly in three-part counterpoint, and then it has a second faster section with a solo right hand and left hand accompaniment. The textures here are both thin enough that this music could make a very appropriate pre-service selection. In this opening movement, the composer asks for diapasons, and in the English music this usually refers to the open diapason and the stopped diapason played together. This piece is also for manuals only, and so it might suit some organists who prefer not to use the pedals. The second part of this piece is a cornet voluntary. The cornet is a registration composed of 8-foot and 4-foot flutes with 12th and tierce. On early English organs, this was a separate stop. If you don't have that stop, or if you don't have this selection of stops I've used, you can find another bright solo registration. That's more like the correct sound that the composer expected, but if you only have, for example, stop diapason and 4-foot principal, you can also get something with a bright character. Here you need two manuals, and the accompaniment will be played on a softer registration, perhaps 8-foot flute. There is a large selection of this sort of repertoire available in these volumes, and also in volumes such as the Old English Organ Music for Manuals volumes edited by C.H. Trevor. And again, there is a large selection of interesting and varied music here, many of which will make good choices for pre-service voluntaries.